Well, St. Pope John Paul II says that the priest should have the heart of Christ the Good Shepherd. But way too many portraits of an effeminate Jesus with gamboling little cutesy sheep around him give the wrong impression that this is kind of a sweet, sentimental image. Anything but. Shepherding has always been a kind of difficult, edgy business. Pope Francis talks about having the smell of your sheep. That gives you some indication of shepherding. But also, shepherds had sticks, they had staffs. They were meant to bring sheep back and also ward off enemies. Shepherding is a kind of difficult, dirty, edgy business. Well, one of the best portraits I've ever seen of a priest as a shepherd in the real sense is this John Michael McDonough film, Calvary. It stars the wonderful character actor Brendan Gleeson. You've seen him in a million different movies. He plays a priest named Father James. And the movie is set in Ireland, in present-day Ireland, so post-sex abuse scandal Ireland. And it opens with Father James in the confessional. And in comes a penitent. You don't see him. But he doesn't give a list of sins. Instead, he makes this brutal threat. I will kill you next Sunday. Let's meet on the beach. Well, it turns out that this man had been, over many years, sexually abused by a priest, not by Father James, another priest, who had long since died. But this man had such internalized anger and frustration, he wanted to take it out on this priest that he acknowledged is innocent. He said, "You're a good priest, but I'm going to kill you because I've been so wounded, by this experience." Well, the movie then unfolds as a kind of Passion Week, as Father James is moving toward this terrible confrontation the following Sunday. What we see as the movie unfolds is that he really does have the smell of a sheep. He's a priest who always wears the soutane, he wears the cassock, so he's unmistakably a priest. And on foot, by car, by boat, any way he can, he visits his parishioners. And they are a very difficult lot. What we're seeing, I think, we're meant to see, is the kind of spiritual wasteland in the wake of the terrible sex scandals in Ireland, and also in the wake of postmodern relativism and all that business. And so Father James goes out to a whole slew of people, a very sexually promiscuous woman. He visits an old writer who lives on an island off the shore, who's suicidal. He visits a deeply cynical businessman who's beyond Richard Dawkins in terms of cynicism about religion. He visits even this young man on death row who had been a serial killer. So you really see a pastor doesn't know his people from a distance. He knows them close up. He's got the smell of the sheep, and he's dealing with a very difficult flock. They're not really appreciative of what he's doing. He gets a lot of sarcastic, cynical remarks. His good works are met with resistance and with mockery. And so you see a real portrait of a heroic priest. Also, as the week unfolds, we discover pretty quickly that that young man in the confessional was not fooling around, because the priest's church is burned down. Clearly a case of arson. And then his beloved dog, he has a dog that he's very devoted to, and the dog is killed. And so the killer is stalking him throughout the week, and it's very clear that he means business. Understandably, Father James is frightened. At one point, he buys a gun in self-defense. And as the climactic day is approaching, he decides, I'm going to get away. I'm going to fly to Dublin. But then at the airport, he turns back. In fact, the only time we see him without his cassock on is when he's trying to flee at the airport. He says, no, I must return and face this ordeal. And so he does. He puts the soutane back on. The Sunday morning rolls around, and there's a wonderful scene of him with his daughter. He had been married before. His wife had died. He had a daughter. And then after the wife's death, he became a priest. So here's his daughter called Fiona. She's also a deeply troubled person. But they're talking, and he says in the course of the conversation, I think we put too much stress on sin and vice and not enough on virtue. And she says, oh, that's interesting. What do you think is the most important virtue? And he says, I think forgiveness has been pretty underrated. And then with that, without telling the daughter what's going to happen, he goes out to the beach to meet this man. It's an awful scene. We see him there in his soutane, in his priest's cassock, and then striding toward him, gun in hand. comes this young man. They confront each other, and the young man just pours out his anger, his bitterness. There's tears. It was a terrible emotional ordeal. And Father James just holds his ground, with him. And then finally, in this awful moment, the young man puts the gun to the priest's forehead and fires, kills him. And you think, oh my gosh, what a horrific ending. What just a dark, nihilistic way for this movie to end. Here's this good, decent, even heroic priest who's just done to death by this terrible man. But then the final scene comes, and the final scene is in prison. So the man has been arrested, he's been convicted, clearly he's in prison. And he's coming out from the prison to visit someone, and we see who it is behind the partition. It's Fiona, the priest's daughter. And the man looks at her with tremendous anguish, like communicating all of the darkness and all of his guilt and everything. Looks at her, and she looks back, doesn't say a word, smiles at him. And with that, the movie ends. And we remember, of course, Father James's really last pastoral observation. We've talked about sin enough. We've not talked about virtue. And the most underrated virtue is forgiveness. And what we sense is his forgiving spirit has gone into his daughter, who is willing to forgive even the man that brutally killed her own father. See, then we recall the movie is named Calvary. That's the place where Jesus died, where Jesus, the ultimate innocent figure, comes up against all the darkness of the world, all the cruelty, injustice, hatred, stupidity, all of it comes after him. He doesn't fight it on its own terms, but rather allows it to wash over him, and he answers with a word of forgiveness. After the resurrection, when he returns to his apostles who had betrayed him, denied him, abandoned him, he says to them, Shalom, peace. And then we remember the priest is meant to be an alter Christus, right? In Latin, it means another Christ. The shepherd, yes, who went all the way to the limits to defend his sheep. The priest who, if he's allowing Christ to live in him, will walk right up Calvary, all the way to the bitter end. And that's what we see in this movie. We see a real heroic priest. But he's passed on now, as Jesus breathes forth his spirit upon the world, the priest has breathed forth this spirit of forgiveness, which has come into his daughter. And then we really get the point of the movie, that through Father James's spirit, even this terrible wasteland of this parish, a green shoot has appeared. And we realize that resurrection follows Calvary.